Okay, so what are you going to do next? I mean, it seems like a really simple question, doesn't it?
Right. You finish one thing, you move on to the next.
Right.
Almost automatic sometimes.
Almost automatic, yeah. But underneath that everyday experience is this huge challenge for the brain. Action selection. How do we, or any creature really, picks just one behavior out of all the things we could be doing right now?
It's fundamental.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. We're working from this really interesting article in Scholarpedia. It pulls together research from, well, all over. Ethology, psychology, neurobiology, even AI.
Yeah, looking at how different fields tackle this core problem of, deciding what next.
Our plan is to sort of unpack the main ideas, look at the different ways people think the brain might solve this puzzle, and explore some of the brain systems that might be involved.
It gets pretty deep, but it's fascinating because it's about how we actually, function in the world.
Absolutely, because this isn't just some abstract scientific problem. You're doing this constantly. Your brain is solving action selection puzzles right now as you listen.
Yeah.
Deciding whether to focus, maybe shift in your seat, think about lunch.
All of it, from tiny adjustments to big life choices, it's the same underlying challenge.
So understanding how your brain might be doing this, that's relevant to everyone. Let's get into it.
Okay, so sort of formal definition. Action selection is basically the job an agent, and that agent could be you, an animal, maybe a complex robot has to do. It needs to choose an action, or maybe a whole sequence of actions.
From everything it can do.
From its whole repertoire, exactly. And it uses information about its internal state, like am I hungry, tired, alert, and also the external world, the context.
Right.
All to pick the action that best helps it reach its goals, whatever those might be at the moment.
So it's like a continuous process of filtering, prioritizing based on what's going on inside and out.
Precisely. And you see related terms everywhere. Behavioral choice, motor program selection, decision-making. They all touch on this.
Okay.
It's also linked closely to attention. I mean, deciding where to look or even just what to think about. That involves picking one thing over others, right? Resolving conflict for processing resources.
That makes sense.
And the Scholarpedia article makes a useful distinction. Action selection is about the choice itself. Behavior switching is more about the specific problem of, managing the transition smoothly once you've made the choice.
Got it. And for this deep dive, we're focusing mainly on the architecture problem.
Yeah, that's the idea. How is the brain, especially invertebrates, animals with backbones like us, actually wired up to implement this selection? We're not digging quite as much into, say, how we learn the best possible action or how insects or robots handle it, though those fields definitely inform the research we'll talk about.
Okay. Now, this is where, for me, it starts to get really fascinating, maybe a bit mind-bending. Is this whole idea of selecting actions, like picking discrete items off a list, is that actually how the brain works? It kind of assumes behavior breaks down neatly into separate chunks?
Right. That's a huge question. The article uses the example of taking a drink of water.
Okay.
Do you first select reach, then select grasp, then select sip? Are those three genuinely separate units the brain chooses between? Or is it just one smooth, integrated action drinking that we happen to describe with those words?
Yeah. If the brain is selecting, what are the actual things on the menu it's choosing from? It's not obvious.
Exactly. It raises this really fundamental question about how behavior is organized. And there are broadly two main camps or views on this.
What are they?
Well, first, there's the more traditional hierarchical view. Think of it like a top-down command structure.
Okay.
You decide on a high-level goal, get hydrated. That kicks off a cascade of lower-level selection problems. Which arm? Which grasp type? When to stop grasping? These smaller decisions resolve conflicts, filtering down until you're selecting basic muscle commands or sensory motor primitives.
So like layers of management making decisions.
Kind of, yeah. It fits with classic neuroscience ideas about layered control.
And the other view?
The other is the dynamical systems view, and it's really gaining momentum. Here, the idea is different. Once you have that initial intention, get water, the behavior doesn't come from picking steps.
No.
Instead, the vast network of your sensory and motor systems, it just sort of self-organizes. The patterns of neural activity settle into stable states, they call them attractor states, that naturally generate the sequence of movements.
So the reach, grasp, sip, emerge.
Exactly. They emerge as a continuous flow from the network's dynamics. You don't necessarily need to explicitly represent reach or grasp as separate options to choose from. The behavior unfolds globally.
Wow. Okay. So one is like picking from menus. The other is more like setting dominoes falling in just the right way, and the pattern emerges naturally.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah. The dynamical view seems especially relevant when you look at, say, simpler nervous systems, or even within complex circuits like the cortex, where the dynamics are clearly very rich.
Which leads to that really provocative question the source brings up.
Right. If basic movement control relies on these dynamics, could it be, as they phrase it, attractor dynamics all the way up?
Meaning, maybe there's no need for that classical idea of selecting discrete actions at all. It just happens.
That's the extreme version of the question. Can a system based purely on self-organization reliably choose one specific behavior when multiple incompatible ones are possible? Or do you need something more deliberate, a dedicated decider? The article leans towards a compromise, especially for complex animals like us. It suggests we likely do have specialized action selection circuits.
Why?
To absolutely guarantee clean choices between incompatible things like you decide to walk, you don't sort of half walk, half stand still. These circuits enforce a winner.
Okay, ensures decisiveness.
But, the brain also uses those powerful attractor dynamics, maybe in areas like the cortex, to help shape what the potential actions are in the first place, or to generate the smooth flow of the movement once a choice is made.
So it's a mix. Specialized choosers working with self-organizing systems.
That seems to be the picture emerging. And the rest of our discussion will explore the evidence for this kind of blended system.
Okay, so let's assume for a moment that the brain does have these specialized selection mechanisms. What makes a good one? What jobs does it absolutely have to do well?
Right. The source lays out some key requirements. First, and maybe most obvious, it has to ensure that only one action is expressed at a time if the actions are incompatible.
Can't sit and stand simultaneously. It makes sense.
Exactly. One winner takes all. Second, it generally needs to favor the most salient competitor.
Salient meaning?
The one that's most strongly signaled as important right now, based on internal needs like strong hunger signals or urgent external cues like a loud noise. The action that's sort of shouting the loudest in the brain should usually get priority.
The most relevant one wins. Okay.
Third, the decision needs to be pretty quick and decisive. You don't want to get stuck hesitating, especially if the options are closely matched. Needs clean, rapid switching.
No dithering.
No dithering. And fourth, once an action is selected, it needs to be fully expressed. It gets full access to the motor system, and crucially, the losers have to be completely shut down so they don't interfere or distort the chosen action.
Winner gets the stage, losers get muted.
Perfectly put. And finally, there's persistence. Ideally, once an action wins, it should stay active, even if the input signals driving it weaken slightly.
Why is that important?
It prevents the system from constantly flipping back and forth between two very similar options just because the input signals are fluctuating a bit. It adds stability.
Okay, so one winner picks the most important, does it fast, lets the winner run fully, blocks losers, and sticks with the choice for a bit. That's the job description.
That's the core job, yeah. And remember, this is happening for many different systems, movement, gaze, maybe even thought processes, all needing coordination to produce smooth, integrated behavior.
Right. So how could the brain actually build something like that? What kind of neural wiring could do this job?
Well, the article goes through a few candidate network architectures, like different ways you could wire up neurons. To even be considered a specialized selector, a brain area needs the right inputs, signals about potential actions and their salience.
Needs the options list.
Right. It needs a way to compute that salience or urgency, a mechanism to actually resolve the conflict, and outputs that can enable the winner and inhibit the losers.
Okay. What are some wiring diagrams?
A classic one is recurrent reciprocal inhibition, or RRI. Imagine neurons representing different actions, and they all strongly inhibit each other.
Like they're all trying to shut each other down.
Exactly. If one starts to become active, it suppresses the others. This naturally leads to a single winner, full selection, blocking losers, and even that persistence we talked about.
Sounds pretty effective, like a wrestling match where the winner pins everyone else.
It is effective.
Yeah.
But the downside is connectivity. If you have, say, 100 possible actions, each one needs connections to inhibit the other 99. That gets really expensive in terms of wiring, especially over long distances in the brain. It doesn't scale well.
Too many wires.
Too many wires, too much space, too much energy. So other architectures might be more efficient. For example, instead of direct competition, you could have a sort of central veto system.
How does that work?
All the action candidates send their signals forward, maybe to excite their own output pathway, but they also excite a central inhibitory element. This element then broadcasts inhibition back to all the output pathways.
A global stop signal.
Kind of, yeah. The winner is the signal strong enough to overcome this background inhibition and activate its pathway, while the global inhibition helps suppress all the losers. This needs fewer long-range inhibitory connections.
More like a central traffic controller saying stop to everyone but giving a green light to one.
That's a decent analogy. It's more wiring efficient, especially if the competitors are far apart in the brain. But it requires careful control of that global signal. There are variations, like having a dedicated selection component that takes in all the bids and just outputs the winner, hiding the messy competition inside.
And these different designs aren't just theoretical, right? Evolution would favor certain solutions.
Absolutely. That point about connectivity costs is huge. Brains can't just wire everything to everything else. It's metabolically expensive and physically constrained.
Right. Space and energy limits.
So architectures that minimize long-range connections, like that global inhibition model or a compact selection module, are likely favored, particularly for higher-level decisions, integrating info from across the brain. Local competition using RRI might be fine within a small area, but not for brain-wide selection.
Makes sense.
And another advantage is modularity. Having a somewhat distinct action selection system means you can evolve or improve your sensory systems or your motor skills without accidentally breaking the crucial mechanism for choosing between them.
It separates the what's from the how and the why, in a way. Keeps the decision-making machinery distinct.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Allows for independent optimization.
Okay, so given these design principles and evolutionary pressures, where in the actual vertebrate brain do we see structures that look like they're doing this job? Where are the candidates?
Well, it's definitely not just one spot. It's likely a network of interacting areas, probably specialized for different types of selection.
Good.
For really urgent life or death stuff escaping a predator, there seems to be dedicated super fast circuitry. The classic example is the Mothner cell system in fish. It triggers a rapid escape reflex.
Ah, yes, the quick C-start wiggle.
That's the one. But a key part of its function seems to be massively inhibiting almost everything else the fish could possibly be doing at that moment. It's an all-or-nothing escape command, and there's evidence for similar fast-acting systems in the mammalian brainstem involved in things like the startle reflex.
An emergency override. Slam the brakes on everything else.
Exactly. Then you have more fixed priority mechanisms. These often built-in hierarchies, maybe where brainstem circuits can override spinal cord reflexes or higher centers inhibit lower ones. Useful for ensuring basic survival functions happen correctly, like defense responses, always trumping feeding if there's danger.
Hardwired priorities.
Right. But they aren't very flexible. They don't help much when you need to dynamically switch between, say, exploring, eating, grooming, socializing, where the best action changes all the time based on context and internal state.
Need something more adaptable for everyday life.
For sure. And we do see that recurrent reciprocal inhibition strategy locally in many places. It contributes to competition, maybe in attention networks or within specific circuits. A neat example mentioned is the sleep-wake switch nuclei in the brainstem and hypothalamus that mutually inhibit each other to ensure you're either mostly awake or mostly asleep, not stuck in between.
A biological flip-flop switch.
Pretty much. But the real star player, the area most researchers point to as a core, specialized action selection device, particularly for voluntary movements in vertebrates, is the basal ganglia.
Okay, the basal ganglia. I've heard them described as like a gatekeeper for movement.
That's a very common and useful analogy. The thinking is their fundamental role is to select and enable desired actions while actively suppressing unwanted competing actions.
How do they function as this gate? What's the mechanism?
Well, they sit in a really strategic position. They receive input from almost the entire cerebral cortex, plus areas involved in emotion, motivation, memory, all converging, especially in a structure called the striatum.
So they get information about everything that could be done.
Essentially, yes. These inputs represent potential actions, maybe weighted by their expected reward or urgency, their salience. Now, the key thing is the basal ganglia's output. It's primarily inhibitory.
They stop things.
They're constantly sending inhibitory signals to downstream motor areas in the thalamus and brainstem, effectively putting the brakes on movement.
Okay, so how does an action happen then?
To allow an action, the basal ganglia circuitry has to inhibit its own inhibition. It has to release the brake specifically for the circuits controlling the desired movement, while keeping the brakes firmly on for all the competing movements.
Whoa, okay, so it's not go, it's stopping for the winner. It's an inverted logic.
Exactly. It's disinhibition. The default state is stop. And selection involves selectively removing that stop signal. It's like opening a specific gate that's normally held shut.
That's clever.
It is. And their internal wiring seems beautifully suited for this. There's evidence for competing pathways, internal feedback loops, and crucially, a structure called the subthalamic nucleus, STN. The STN seems to provide a powerful global stop or slow down signal that helps suppress the losers broadly, kind of like that efficient global inhibition model we discussed.
Fascinating. So the basal ganglia are like the sophisticated central selector.
That's the dominant hypothesis, yes, especially for voluntary learned actions. But there are likely other layers too. Down in the brainstem, areas like the medial reticular formation, MRF, might handle selection for more basic, innate behaviors.
Like what?
Things seen even in infants or animals without a cortex, basic locomotion patterns, posture control, maybe simple orientation responses. The MRF is centrally located, gets input from everywhere, projects widely to motor neurons. Its own internal structure might represent building blocks of behavior, and selection could involve activating compatible blocks and inhibiting incompatible ones.
And how does this relate to the basal ganglia?
Interestingly, the basal ganglia's project down to the MRF. This suggests a possible hierarchy. Maybe the basal ganglia select the overall behavioral strategy or goal, and then instruct the brainstem circuits, like the MRF, to implement the specific motor patterns.
So basal ganglia picks eat, MRF handles the chew and swallow program.
Something like that, potentially. Now, of course, in mammals, especially primates like us, you have the enormous cortex.
Right. Where does that fit in? Does it take over selection?
Not entirely, but it adds incredible sophistication. The cortex, especially the frontal lobes, is massively interconnected with the basal ganglia, forming these complex loops.
What do these loops do?
They allow cortical processing involving context, memory, learning, planning, predicting outcomes to strongly influence the selection process happening in the basal ganglia. It lets us choose between a quick, maybe reflexive brainstem response and a more considered, goal-directed cortical action.
So the cortex doesn't replace the basal ganglia gatekeeper. It gives it much smarter instructions on which gate to open.
That's a great way to put it. Studies on animals without a cortex show they can still perform basic motivated actions, eating, grooming, basic movements driven by the basal ganglia and brainstem. But they lose all the complex skills, the flexibility, the planning, the learning from errors.
So cortex isn't essential for basic selection, but vital for smart, adaptive cognitive selection.
Exactly. The prefrontal cortex, working through these loops, lets us weigh rewards, costs, rules, social context. It hugely enriches the information the basal ganglia uses to make this selection. It allows for planning, working memory, and inhibiting inappropriate actions based on future goals, not just immediate stimuli.
It brings our intelligence and experience into the what next decision.
Precisely. And just to circle back, even with these specialized selectors like the basal ganglia and the enriching role of the cortex, those self-organizing processes are still likely playing a huge role throughout.
How so?
Well, competition within sensory areas helps filter what even becomes a candidate for action selection. Attractor dynamics and motor cortex might help stabilize and execute the chosen movement smoothly. Some computational models even suggest that specifying what the action is and selecting which action to do might not be entirely separate steps, but emerge together from the network dynamics.
So it's definitely not a simple picture. It's not just a selector box, and it's not just dynamics. It's this intricate dance between them.
That really seems to be the take-home message from the source material. The brain leverages both dedicated machinery for ensuring clean, decisive choices and the powerful, efficient, self-organizing properties of its neural networks.
Wow. Okay. So we started with this seemingly simple question. What are you going to do next?
Yeah.
And it led us down this incredible path. From just realizing the scale of the challenge, choosing one thing out of potentially infinite options to that deep debate. Is it discrete selection or emergent dynamics?
Right, the hierarchical versus dynamical views.
Then looking at how the brain could solve it, those different circuit designs like reciprocal inhibition or global veto systems, shaped by real-world constraints like wiring costs.
And the benefits of modularity.
Yeah. And finally, zeroing in on the likely players in our own brains, the super fast escape circuits, the basic brainstem organizers like the MRF, the crucial role of the basal ganglia as that sophisticated, disinhibitory gatekeeper.
Working hand in glove with the cortex, which adds all that intelligence, context, and planning ability.
It paints this picture of just an incredibly complex yet somehow elegant solution to this problem we face every single second.
It really does.
So here's a final thought to leave everyone with. Thinking about this whole system, this blend of specialized circuits that seem designed to make definite choices, working alongside these powerful self-organizing dynamics where behavior just kind of unfolds from the state of the network, how much of what you experience as a conscious, deliberate decision to do something is actually that selection happening in a specific circuit? And how much is it simply the most probable behavior emerging naturally from the complex, dynamic state your brain is in right now, interacting with your body and the world around you? Is it a choice or an unfolding? What really stands out to you after hearing all this?